Hey, what's the first song? 414. Good evening. Glad that you're all here tonight. If you'd like to take out a song book and turn to number 414, that'll be the first song tonight. Eric's going to lead us in our songs. Evan will have the opening prayer, and Zach will have the invitation tonight. I know we have quite a few that were planning on getting on the live stream, and I had several texts asking, was it still working? And I don't know. We'll find out. We're still working on it. Mickey's planning on doing some more stuff this weekend and hopefully continue to make it better if we can ever figure out exactly what the problem is. So just we ask for your patience if you're trying to watch us tonight, and hopefully you can. But we're going to cut the mic feed for just a few minutes and make our announcement. There is a name I love to hear, I love to sing its word. It sounds like music in my ear, the sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because he first loved me. It tells me of my Savior's love, who died to set me free. It tells me of his precious blood, the sinner's perfect plea. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because he first loved me. It tells of one whose loving heart can feel my deepest woe. Within each sorrow bears a part that none can bear below. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because he first loved me. Our open prayer. Bow with me, please. Father in heaven, we come to you this moment thankful for this day. Bless us with, thankful for the warmer weather and the better conditions than we've seen in the past few days, and just thankful for the safety
that you granted us throughout this past winter weather that we received, and just thankful for the safe travel that we were able to get here tonight and participate in our service here tonight. We're thankful for the opportunity that we have to join together as a church family and sing song of praises, listen to a message presented by Brother Zach, and participate in Bible study. We just pray that all of that goes in a manner that's pleasing to you. We want to say a special prayer right now for Peggy Childress and Terry, and for the health difficulties that Peggy is going through. We pray that you watch over and be with them as a family, give comfort to Terry, and allow him to take care of Peggy to the best of his ability. We also want to say a special prayer for Harold McBride and the Pregel family and the situation they're going through with Brother Harold. We just ask that you watch over him, give him peace, and be with the Pregels as they go through this with him. We also want to say a special prayer for Letty's grandmother and her recovering from her fall and her hip. We just pray that you continue to be with her, that it may go well, and continue to be with her as she's able to come home. We're thankful for this day and just thankful for this opportunity and thankful for tonight. And as we go throughout the remainder of this service, we just ask that you be with us and watch over us. Keep us safe as we leave. Bring us back to the next appointed hour. And we're thankful for your Son and everything he did for us. And we ask this prayer in his name. Amen.
497. 497. The earth and its riches with which it is stored, the world and its dwellers belong to the Lord. For he on the seas and foundation has laid, and firm on the waters its pillars have stayed. Oh, who shall mount the Jehovah ascend, or who in the place of his holiness stand? The man of the heart and of hands without stain, who has not sworn falsely nor done what is vain. O gates which are headed, ageless doors, lift them high, the great King of glory to enter draws nigh. This great King of glory, oh, who can he be? Jehovah of hosts, King of glory is he. I'd like to mark number 280. That will be the invitation song, 280. Before the invitation, we'll sing 574. 573. I'm in the way of bright shining way. I'm in the glory land way. Telling the world that Jesus saves today. home above. Oh, I'm in the glory land where I'm in the glory land where I'm in the glory land where heaven is nearer and the way groweth clearer, for I'm in the glory land where
Last week, I was at a conference up in Nashville, and they had a keynote speaker there for one of the breakout sessions. And he used the story of the coffee bean to talk about how a person can change the world around them. The story of the coffee bean begins with a boiling pot of water, a carrot, an egg, and of course the coffee bean. All three of these items face the same adversity, which is the boiling water, but each one of them reacts in a different way. Before going to the boiling water, the carrot is hard and soft, or hard and strong, sorry. But after being in the boiling water, it changes and becomes soft. With the egg, you've got a fragile thing that has an outer shell that protects the liquid inside of it. But again, after sitting through the boiling water, the inside becomes hardened. However, the coffee bean acts differently. Once in the boiling water, it changes everything around it. And so, ever since I've heard this story, it's kind of been on my mind because I feel like as Christians, we live in that boiling pot of water. Each and every day, if we go through life with trials and temptations, that can sometimes challenge our faith. And throughout the Bible, we can read verses that talk about going through life and going through those trials. Romans 12, verse 2 says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God." When we face these trials and temptations, do we sometimes act like a carrot? Do we seem hard and strong at first, but with all the pain and adversity, we become soft and lose our strength? Or are we like the egg, starting off with a heart that can be changed, but when those difficult times come our way, we become hardened and stiff? Or are we like that coffee bean that changes with the water? James 1, verse 2 through 4 says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience do its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." If you want to turn over to 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1. We're going to read verses 13 through 16. "Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lust, as in your ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, 'Be holy, for I am holy.'" When I think about the coffee bean and what it does inside the boiling water, I think of a couple things. A couple things come to my mind. And the first one is kind of two parts. So the first thing I think about is the smell of the freshly brewed coffee and how it fills the air all throughout the house. So when I first think about the smell, I think of, that's what the first thing that comes to mind is the smell. Ephesians 5, 1 through 2 says, "Therefore be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love, as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet smelling aroma." Philippians 4:18, as Paul is finishing his letter to the church of Philippi, he says, "Indeed, I have all and abound. I am full, having received from," I knew this name, but I done lost it. Yes, "the things that sent from you, a sweet smelling aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, well pleasing to God." And then when I think about that smell, I think about how it travels all through the house. And my mind immediately goes to Matthew chapter 5. We'll turn there next. And of course, all you know where I'm going with this. 14 through 16.
You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So just like that smell that goes to the house, we need to be light for those in the world to see us. Christ gave his life for our sins, and in doing so, he set an example of how we should conduct ourselves in this boiling hot water of the world. If we try to conduct ourselves the way Christ did, we can change that boiling water around us to smell better and to be like the light. And the last thing I think about when I think about the coffee change the boiling water is the flavor. Boiling water doesn't really have a taste, and normally people don't get a chance to taste it because it's hot. But however, like salt, the coffee bean adds flavor. And going back up to verse 13, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. As we go through the boiling water with its trials and temptations, what are we going to end up like? Again, are we going to end up like the carrot? Are we going to end up like the egg? Or are we going to end up like the coffee bean? That is going to transform the things around us and to be a sweet smelling aroma to the Lord. Tonight, if you have become soft like the carrot or hardened like the egg, come forward and let your request be known to the Lord, so that way you can live like a coffee bean, changing others around you to live as Christ would have. If you would, please come as we stand and as we sing.
I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. Oh, but go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back. My cross I'll carry till I see Jesus. My cross I'll carry till I see Jesus. My cross I'll carry till I see Jesus. No turning back, I'll follow him. All right. Can you hear me? Hope so. We've been working with this mic. So Sunday, we've been doing all kinds of things trying to get this all working better. And I saw them scrambling around. Sarah was getting texts. People at home couldn't hear anything. We had family, people from out of town joining, and they were working and adjusting. We been trying all kinds of things. And finally, when it was all over, I sat down and I looked, and I had flipped it the wrong way. Painful. Mom and Dad were snowed in. They decided to join us. They're like, we heard everything perfectly fine. So you stood up, and it was just silence. But they were happy to be able to, they were happy to be able to join in when we were doing the communion and all that. They said the singing sounded good, so all that was fine. We'll get the hang of this eventually, you would think. So we're talking about evidences, and I couldn't remember last time what was the next thing on the outline until I got home and looked at it. So we're talking about the first piece of this is why we believe in God, and then it's why we believe in Jesus and why we believe in the Bible. And so when we think about why we believe in God, evidences for the existence of God, so far, and hopefully the kind of the logic and the flow of this makes sense to you. One reason is because there's stuff exists and that demands some kind of explanation, right? Then from there, it's, well, not just things exist, but life exists. That's really mind-boggling. The more you think about life, any kind of life is just remarkable, right? Um, you probably know this, but it is amazing how many of the space missions um, are in some way or other looking for life. You know, we send these rovers to Mars. We've launched craft that have caught up with an asteroid as it's passing by and landed on it in real little sample. Almost every time we do anything like that, one thing they're looking for is some sort of signature for life. They're constantly searching for, because I think they're trying to figure it out and trying to understand it. You know, it is remarkable. How is this life here on Earth? And so, you know, it demands some kind of explanation, right? It is, it doesn't lend itself to explanation. I mean, it doesn't make sense to think about it. Maybe it just sort of happened accidentally because it's so incredibly complex. Then the third thing was because you exist, right? Taking it the next, when we get to humans, so that this is kind of building, I think, is at least in my mind. You got stuff, life, people, and we're special in several ways. But one of the things is our ability to think, our consciousness, our awareness, our ability to have these conversations and imagine, dream, and ponder, and all those things. You know, we see that we're unique in nature in that way, and that demands some kind of explanation. How would just stuff, you know, you take all the elements, you can see a periodic table, right? Have just a whole sandbox full of that, everything you want, whatever it is, and you just randomly give it enough time, and it would become alive, and it would become aware of itself, and it would have like a consciousness. I mean, that's really hard to believe. So so these are sort of the arguments. The fourth thing I think on there was because good and bad or right and wrong exists. I already talked about that a little bit last week. It came up when someone mentioned our conscience, and so I've already kind of said what I wanted to say about that. In other words, we as humans experience the fact that we all agree that there's right and wrong. There's really, I don't know if there's ever been anybody, unless there's, you know, really, really something very much wrong with him. But universally, everybody understands that there's things that are right and there's things that are wrong. And that, you know, it can be argued points to some standard outside of ourselves. Where did that come from? Why do we have a sense of morality? So that is another argument that is something, there's a higher standard that's bigger than me, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than us, that defines right and wrong. Of course, that would make sense with God, but if truly it's all just chemical reactions and the particles bouncing into each other, there's really not any right or wrong to that. There's not right or wrong to, you know, you can mix some chemicals together and they bubble and other, you know, I mean, there's things happen when you interact particles together, interesting things, you know, but there's no morality to any of that. It's just random stuff happening. No good or bad, you know, but we understand there is good or bad, and that's something kind of, you know, interesting. So, those four things. And then the fifth topic I want to look at is a potential objection. Before we move into that, any thoughts or comments on those 4 points? You want to add anything, if it came to your mind while you've been thinking it over, or since we've talked about it, or anything you'd like to add in to what we've said already? Why I believe there's a creator. Why I believe in God. No? Okay. Well, if you think something, feel free to add it in any time as we go. So tonight, I wanted to ponder for a little bit. You might think, well, if that's the case, right, if it is, as Paul says in Romans 1, these things have been clearly perceived in what has been created ever since creation. In other words, Paul argues that from the beginning of time, as long as there's been people around, they've been able to clearly perceive these attributes of God in the creation. The Psalms say that heavens declare his handiwork. So it's basically all of creation around us is telling us there's a creator. That's what it's telling us. So you would think then, why wouldn't 100% of people believe at least in God? There are, I would say, over the course of time, from what I can tell, every civilization on earth pretty much had believed in some kind of God. Historically, it would be, I don't even know if there's any societies that there were, like the communists tried to tamp out religion. They really were kind of against it. But basically, historically, most societies, unless somebody was really trying to smother it, people, whether it be Native Americans or wherever, they believed in there's got to be something. There's got to be something outside of ourselves. But when you think about it, there are people today, probably a growing number, who reject the idea of there being a God and don't choose, I would say, choose not to believe in God. And when you think about what kind of reason they may have, what kind of argument they might make, what comes to your mind? What would be some reason why somebody might say, I don't know, I don't believe, I don't know that there is a God. What might be a reason?
Pain and suffering, just like the loss, like the death of a loved one. Like going back to my case where I talked about, a lot of people blame God whenever a loved one dies. It's not God's fault. Evil's there because man's, what man did in the garden. So.
Yeah, so that's the one we're going to think about. That might be out again. That's the third or fourth time I think we that particular. I just have to notice I was walking over. You're not looking as bright, Steve. We're going to spend some time about that. But besides that, so I want to dive into that topic. Aside from that, though, let's set that aside for just a moment. Okay, what other reasons might somebody say, I don't know, I don't believe in God?
I think it's a lot of it is the way they were brought up. Their parents didn't teach them, how to discern right and wrong, or take them to church or teach them about God.
So probably this will reinforce itself because a growing number of people aren't teaching their kids, and they're not going to church, so they're not raised being taught about God, and they're certainly not going to hear about it at school very much. And that's a good explanation. Maybe they just nobody's ever told them. It's pure lack of hearing about it.
I think there are a lot of people too who don't believe in anything they can't see.
Yes.
It's not logical that
Yeah.
there's a greater being up there that's built all this. It must be something else. It can't be something supernatural. There has to be some logic to it.
Yes.
They don't see any logic to God.
Right. I think that's actually I think that's right. So for a lot of people, they only want to accept things that can be observed and tested, and anything outside of that you can't touch, feel, look at, examine, then they question whether that's real or is it just something people have invented, right? That's probably the most common reason for people to question God is simply because we don't see God directly. We can't point a telescope in the right direction and there he is. Look, everybody, there's God over there. If we could, of course, that would make things different, right? If we found him and we could look in that point, if you aim it in this direction and look far enough, there's God over there and he's doing something, then that would be different. But we can't do that. We can't see him in that way. And so it is something that I think that some people question. Yes. Okay.
Something I've heard. Maybe I've even thought myself. If God being perfect, this perfect being, created man out of his image, and man messed up, why wouldn't he just start over? Why wouldn't he just fix it? And then continue, but then that's the caveat to there continues to be the suffering and the pain.
It's related, exactly, yes.
So but that's the beginning part.
That's right.
Why in the first place would he even allow something like that?
And I understand the free will part of that, but.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. That is the same, it's just a different facet of the same problem that I think Jonathan was raising. And that is like one of the biggest objections. That's why I wanted to talk about it. But we'll hang on, put that on hold for just a moment. Yes, sir.
I think some people try to resist belief because then they have to accept a form of accountability, and they have to accept that they were created by somebody, that it just didn't happen, and that, you know, but if they try to debunk it, then they don't have to accept that.
That is, yes, Derek. I think that is very perceptive, and the Bible supports that. There's a passage in, I think it's 1 Thessalonians. Ooh, it's a little dangerous one up there. As we turn there, I don't think that's right. Let me see if I can make sure. I don't think it's 1 Thessalonians. Hang on just a moment. That might be. Okay, 2 Thessalonians. Now this is, okay, so it's a difficult passage, chapter 2, man of lawlessness and all these things. But notice what it says in verse 9. The coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan with all powerful and false signs and wonders, with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Therefore God sends them a strong delusion, that they might believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So the point I want to make from that is that your point is there's a strong motive there's a strong incentive to reject the knowledge of God, because if we accept that there is a God, that comes with some heavy consequences, right? If there is a creator to whom I am accountable, then I have to answer for what I do, and I have to maybe conform to what he wants me to do, and so that comes with a whole lot of consequences when you stop and think about it. So if we could somehow decide that there is nothing bigger than us, this was John Lennon's Imagine. Imagine there's nothing, nothing above us, nothing below us. There's imagine. Then in a sense, like if you can imagine that there's nothing but us, then there is no higher. There's no judgment day. There's no accountability. We're basically free to just live how we want to live. And that's really, I think, a very strong pull to a lot of people to, if believing in God means believing in, all this, then there's a reason why I think people, especially if they don't agree with or want to do things that maybe, the Bible would say you're not supposed to do. If you can sort of somehow convince yourself there is no God, then you don't have to worry about any of that. You can just sort of put all that aside, because now it doesn't mean anything.
But when you put that with Romans 1, because it says there's no excuse for anybody to not know that there's a God. So to me, that would, people that say they don't believe in God, I think they're intentionally deceiving themselves, because that verse says you have no excuse to not know there's a God.
Yeah, and I think we have to, when we combine all this, so you've got like Anne suggests, consider somebody who was brought up and they weren't taught anything about it, or maybe they were even taught very plainly that there isn't, that this is all a bunch of nonsense, So you've got, I don't know that we should assume anything about anybody without knowing. you know, without them explaining like what their thought process is, whether it's that they've been hurt really bad and now that they're sort of, it's crushed their faith because of something awful they've experienced, or whether it was the way they were raised, or whether they're just like a super deep thinker and they've kind of pondered these things and they, you know, they can't wrap their head around it or explain some things. So I guess I'm saying all that to say when we talk to people, we certainly don't want to assume the worst about anybody. But I do think all these factors play into their various parts of, and clearly he says there is no excuse. I mean, the evidence is there. You know, imagine you arrive at Disney World. So you go to Disney World. Do they still have the monorail? All right. So you go to Disney World. You wait in line. You get this. It hovers. You know that the monorail hovers like it's electromagnetic force. Pretty cool. So it was space age for its time, right? And then you go and there's the Magic Kingdom, all this stuff, right? Now, what if somebody tried to convince you that it's maybe just always been there? That maybe it just kind of it happened in the same way that like a mountain range happens, or in the same way that you know that over here there's a boulder and over there there's some forest, and then over here there's this Disney World. And you say, no, that's crazy. It's clearly somebody made it. Well, did you see them make it? You don't know who made it. You weren't around when they made it. You don't even know how they made it. You don't understand how it works. But you, with your own nobody would be able to convince you. Nobody would be able to convince you that just happened by itself, that it was just always there, that given enough time and enough random chances, it's bound to happen somewhere. There's got to be a Disney World, right? Because if you just wait long enough, if you give nature like billions of years and billions of planets and all that, surely on one of them there's going to form a Disney World. That's basically the argument, for life and all that. But you can use your own brain to look around at it and decide if that's reasonable or not. And that's, I think, the point that you're making there from Romans 1. It's all on display for us to think about and to witness and to see. So for all these reasons, anyway, that's the reasons why. Maybe some reasons why people don't. Other thoughts before we dive into this? Oh, we got a lot of thoughts. Yes, okay.
I was gonna say, for some of the folks I've talked to in previous times, I feel like some of them they want to believe, but simply due to the fact that they would have to change their ways or accept the fact that there's consequences.
That gets back to right.
Yeah, it's like they don't want to simply because of that fact, and so they just decide not to look that way because it's like, well, I don't want that to change. It's like, man, you only knew what you're missing out on.
Every now and then, you can talk. Every now and then, I talk to somebody and they will be in a moment of sort of just really being vulnerable and open, will admit to this. But a lot of times when you talk to people and you invite them to church, and they may have 1,000 different reasons why. Well, how do we even know the Bible? It's been translated so many times, and there's all this, and I know some hypocrites and all. But then sometimes they will admit that they know that if they were to go to church, there's some things they would need to change. Like if they down deep, they know that would, I couldn't just do that and keep living the way I'm living. Maybe they realize they're doing some things that they enjoy doing, and they're not ready. And that's exactly what Jesus talks about with like counting the cost and the rich young ruler and all those kind of things. That at some point you reach a point where it's like, I know that if I go that way, I've got to leave some things behind, and I don't want to do that. So there's kind of maybe a list of reasons, but that might not be the real. Now it's not for us to assume that about anybody, but I think you're right. That's right. At least for some people, that's their reason for sure.
Even when you've been brought up in the church and you believe in God, sometimes you're put in a situation like Jonathan was talking about when you have a loved one. We had a child pass away, and you're at the hospital, and the doctor would come in and told you, said, this is not looking good, this is fixing to be bad, And so you go in and you try to make a deal. God, if you'll cure him, I'll do this and this and this. I'll change my life. I'll do better. I promise I'll do better. And then he dies. All right? And then you're thinking, he let me down. God let me down. And I had a preacher and he was not with our church, but he was with a different church, but he was a friend of ours. And I told him one day, I said, I asked him to heal and he didn't do it. And he said, actually, he did. You got to understand, he's not in pain anymore. He is healed. He's not with you, but he took care of that. You know?
Yeah.
And you got to say.
So, for a lot of people who have lost their faith, I think it gets back to this issue, which is the main thing I want to talk about. And if we don't get through tonight, that's fine. We can continue into next week. Let's go to Job chapter 3. Job lost his children as well. He experienced loss of family, loss of financial loss. He experienced health loss. He basically had the, everything that can kind of happen to make life miserable happen. And so he asked the big question, why? Which is, what a lot of people want to know. Why? Why did God allow my child to die? Why did he not heal him, right? Why did he allow this thing to happen? So Job, in verse 11 of chapter 3, says, why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me? Or why the breast that I should nurse? Then I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept. I would have been at rest. The kings and councils of the earth would rebuilt ruins for themselves, with princes who had gold or filled their house with silver. Why was I not as a hidden stillborn child, as infants who never see the light? Then the wicked cease from troubling, or there the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary are at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together. They hear not the voice of the taskmaster. The small, the great are there. The slave is free from his master. Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, who dig for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? And he says in verse, let's just keep going. For my sighings come instead of bread, my groanings are poured out like water, for the thing that I fear comes upon me. What I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. And what Job wants to know, and what he says here a dozen times, is why, right? Why? And there's no easy answers to that. And there's no easy answers in this book of Job to that question, why? When God shows up at the end, he doesn't say, okay, Job, sit down, I'm going to explain it all to you. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, let me clear all this up so you understand why these things happen. He doesn't. He basically just tells Job, you're in no position to question me. That's essentially the answer to his question, why? He doesn't get to put God on trial and make God defend himself about why things are the way they are. But these questions, like basically, why is life like this when it's hard or difficult or painful, when there's grief and loss of health and suffering and all those horrible things, why is it the way that it is? And so some people who say they don't believe in God, we can't assume this about anybody, but I believe that there are people who, what really they feel is they're angry with God, or they're hurt by God, right? They feel hurt and they feel angry. And so rejecting God is sort of a way of, saying, I'm mad at God. Basically, I refuse to acknowledge God. I'm going to put God away from my mind. I'm not going to believe in God because if God is there, why would he allow? And they're interestingly, in a way, if in fact everything is just random molecules bouncing around with no purpose or meaning, then none of this means anything, really. There's no meaning to squat. There's nothing. There's no good or bad. There's really nothing to be happy or sad about, because it's all just, it's like, just random interactions happening. There's no, so the fact that we feel deep pain and anger and injustice and all that also sort of points to the fact that there's something bigger than ourselves. Those, in a weird way, that kind of points to God. It means that people don't understand God, right? They're angry or they're hurt, and so but that's exactly what Job is feeling. He's upset and he doesn't know why, and he wants some kind of explanation for why is life like this. And so I think that is, several people have mentioned this. For some people, especially for people who once had faith and then lose their faith, or their faith is shaken or questioned, I think a lot of times it's not because they're reading a science textbook or because of something like that, but it's because something in life that happens that shakes it to the core and makes them wonder, about their faith in God. Thoughts or comments about that before we get into it?
So many internal evidences. What you just talked about is one of the reasons the Lord came.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
That's why he came in the first place. Remember when at the conversion of Saul, especially in Acts 26, and he's walking on the road, I guess. He's going to Damascus, and all of a sudden he sees this light. He falls down. And you know what Saul said? Who are you, Lord? Who are you? And he answered that by saying, it's because you saw this light, didn't you? You saw these things, and there are more things I'm going to reveal to you. And the reason for that is we can be redeemed from Satan. We can be redeemed from the wrong that we see and that we do. But that's the reason the Lord came in the first place. And so internally, you have to have faith. If you don't,
That's what it was.
if you just don't have faith that the Lord was perfect, he lived here, and then he shed his blood. It's hard to explain how blood does that. It's because he said he does. That's why. He said, I can shed my blood too. It doesn't do anything except I die, And then there's something else, but that's how we go through the blood. But I'm going to get too deep into that. But that's why Jesus came in the first place. It's so we have and live the perfect life and then was resurrected. So we could actually believe that there's something else besides just dying and nothing is ever going to happen. Sprang up and died, and that's the end, like Rose Run.
Right.
But that's why, in the most basic sense, to me, that's why the Lord came. God sent him so we can see and believe that there's something else there. That's all internal evidence, but
That's right.
that's where we get it.
Yes. So we'll get to of course, the next topic will be about Jesus after we move through this, the Creator arguments. Yeah. And, for a lot of people, I know a lot of people do, they first and foremost believe in Jesus. They got some questions about things in the Bible, they got questions about other things, but they believe in Jesus, right? So you could start the whole discussion with Jesus. Like that could be your beginning point. Let's start with Jesus. Or you can start with, well, we believe there must be a creator. So really kind of however wherever you begin, but I agree with you that Jesus is really the answer to all of our questions. And even this question of what you guys are asking about, Jesus is the answer to that. And I just don't know if we'll see how far we get as we think about it. Other thoughts? Yes.
So I think one other one that's maybe really sad is a lot of times even people that claim to be Christians do such a poor job of painting the picture of who God is, bearing his image, that it makes God look like someone that people don't want to believe in.
Yeah, that's true. We were watching a show on TV, and I always hate when they show this thing, but it was like this character who in the show doesn't believe in God. His wife dies, and he's asked to go to a funeral, and he's asked what her favorite verse is. It brings up a lot of bad memories. But anyway, they had this flashback to him as a kid, and his I guess dad was like a preacher, but was like super harsh, and but his picture of what that looks like was something that made him run away from it, and so he had an experience with someone who was supposed to be, a godly person, but scarred him in a way. And so, yeah, that's definitely another part of, I think, explaining maybe why people end up not believing. Maybe an experience like that. Ashley?
I know of people who maybe didn't go to church at all, that know a little bit of Bible. And I even know people who have grown up in church and as adults have come to the same point of saying there's slavery in the Bible, there's genocide in the Bible, like all these atrocities have happened in the Old Testament history. All of those things are wrong to me. This is what this person said. It's all wrong to me, and I don't understand how a God that's of love would allow that to go on.
Yeah. And some of that's not easily answered for sure. I don't remember I had a list for like an objection about why we believe in the Bible, but I don't think that was it. But that is another thing that there's, once you move beyond, there are people, by the way, there's quite a few people who would say, I believe there must be a power. I believe there's a God. I believe in God, but I'm not sure about some of the stuff in the Bible. That's a pretty common view. So you've got like pure atheists, which are people that say, I'm 100% convinced there's nobody out there. That's actually a pretty small group of people. There's not a ton of people who are just hardcore, like, I am convinced there is no God. But there's a lot of people who believe there's probably a higher power of some sort, but they're not 100% sold on the Bible being the Word of God. And they bring up some objections like that, and we'll get to some of that kind of stuff when we talk about why we believe in the Bible. Yes, Terry?
I was going to say one more thing about it. We talked, and I said internal evidences and referred to the Lord coming and why He comes up. But even in the Old Testament, like a whole book of Ecclesiastes,
Right.
where Solomon says, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. We all have good, we all have bad, everything happens to us, around us and to us, but we have to read the last verse or two.
Yeah.
It's when we're here, if we don't fear God and keep His commandments, that we've missed it. We've missed the whole thing, the whole purpose of life and worshiping God and honoring Him. But He spends a whole book, all kinds of instances that say that happens to all, and it's all vanity. And so just enjoy your food and your drink, and enjoy life. And it's easy for people to read that and don't really get the message in the last few verses that say, look, here's the conclusion of all of that. Here's the answer to all that. Fear God and keep His commandments. So I only add that to say it's in the Old Testament as well as New. All the internal evidences and the things that happen. And you've been talking about, we've been going through the divided kingdom lately with all kingdoms, but all of that time, God said, you got to believe in me. You got to do what I ask you to do. And over and over and over throughout history, we have done it to poor consequences every time.
That's right. That's right. And that gets back to that's really the answer to the question of suffering and death and all those horrible things. If we go back to the end of Genesis 1, at the conclusion of creation, you remember that in verse 31, what does God say about all of it?
Good.
Yeah. Even very good. Right? Very good. So, nothing bad so far, right? And then we get to there's nothing bad really until we get to chapter 3. Well, the first bad thing is in chapter 2, when he says it was not good for man to be alone, right? So that was the first bad thing was, it wasn't good for man to be alone, so he made him help. But the first kind of bad thing is in chapter 3, where they're deceived and tempted. So this brings up the big, heavy hitter questions, why, right? So this goes back to Caden's point. if we accept that the curses and that the trouble and death, which is the ultimate thing, right? We're mortal. We die. And that's the big thing that we wrestle with. Our loved ones die. People die. We're all going to die. That's like the big problem. And, you know, along the way between here and dying, we suffer. We go through hard things. If that is a consequence of the fall, then you might ask why, to go with Job's question, why is it this way, right? Why make it that way? Why allow those things to exist? Why allow, if that's how it would turn out, you know, after they first sinned, to your point, why not just say, we're going to start over and we're going to do this differently, right? We're going to create another kind of thing where that doesn't happen. And now we only have 2 minutes. So we will definitely not be able to explore this in depth in 2 minutes. But there's really not a long answer to that. But the short answer, well, let me just put it out to you. Why do you suppose? Why allow these things to exist? Why? Yes.
It makes me think about the movie Santa Claus. I think it was Santa Claus 3. When he puts the little toy in the thing, it starts spitting out a little toy army.
I don't know this.
Okay, so he's got this toy army that's doing everything he wants them to do.
Yes, this is the answer. Yeah.
But why are they doing everything that he wants them to do? Because that's the way they're wired. They have no choice in that.
That's it.
So if you have a child and you teach them how to do something, and they do the right thing because they chose to, it's all the more sweet because they decided to do it, not because they didn't have a choice. So God could have made man over and over and over, or just the one time because he's God, he do whatever, and made us to where, okay, everybody's gonna follow me. That's it. There will be no sin. He could have made it that way, but he wanted us to make the choice to follow.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's the bottom line. We will continue thinking about that. I want you, in the meantime, to think about this. What would a friendship look like if one of the 2 people in the friendship had no say in it? Right? Like imagine a slave master and a slave, and the slave has no choice, right? To be like they can't have their, you know, well, how much of a, you know, if you have no freedom of choice, what kind of relationship can you have in that circumstance? Just ponder that between now and next week. And Sunday morning, by the way, Sunday morning's lesson, you mentioned the series will be on Ezekiel bread. So you can buy Ezekiel bread in the store. Does anybody know that? So we have some at home. I thought about bringing some so everybody could try it, but I don't know that we will do that. Anyway, I'm just letting you know that in case you're like want to get you kind of curious about Sunday morning. We will be talking about Ezekiel bread, and it's ironically related a little bit to this topic that we're talking about. And the answer is Jesus. We'll keep remembering that. So it all, of course, everything in the Bible kind of connects, but you'll see how it all comes together. We'll continue this topic because we didn't really get to much of the answer